Well, the confusing world of annuities. You know, there's some topics in this teaching course that demand a full teaching course to cover the topic. Then there's other topics that we can do 3 or 4 of them in a teaching course. That's not the case with annuities. Annuities are confusing and annuities are popular. They're soaring in popularity. Just consider this for just a second. $228 billion. That is what flowed into annuities in 2015. The first 3 quarters of 2016, $163 billion flowed into annuities. Let's put that in perspective for just a second and talk about mutual funds, the popularity of mutual funds, and look at the 2015 numbers of deposits into mutual funds. A negative $102 billion. More money came out of mutual funds than went into mutual funds. So the popularity is soaring, and the problem is that people are confused about annuities, and I say that because they think they've got one thing and they really have another thing, and they discover that 3 or 4 years into the process and they're stuck. So what I want to do today is talk a little bit about some of the finer points of annuities, clear up the confusion so that you have a good education on how they work. Now, here's the problem with the whole idea of annuities, is that, and if there's one thing I want you to take away, it's this. Annuities are more often sold than recommended. And let me say it one more time. Annuities are more often sold than recommended. Think of it this way. If they're being sold, it looks like this. Here's the annuity, here's the client. The advisor focuses on the sizzle, focuses on the benefits of the annuity, but never connects it to the client. The client likes the benefits, the client invests in the annuity, but it may not be the best option for the client. If the advisor recommends an annuity, then that means the advisor went through the process of determining what the best annuity was for the client, went through the process of making sure that that annuity met the client's needs. It looks more like this, where they're connected. The client is very clear why they're investing into that annuity. But that's not often the case. More often the case is like this, and that gap remains. So we want to clear up that gap and make sure that you are educated on how they work. Because in the risk-averse world that we live in today, investors don't want to take risk. They went through the tech bubble, 2000, 2002, lost a lot of money, gained it back, then went through the financial crisis of 2007, 2009, and they're done with stocks, they're done with equities. I've never seen a time where people were more risk-averse, and annuities fit that profile. Annuities are the best, at least at the time of this shooting, are the best guaranteed rate investment that you can get. But once again, they're clearly misunderstood. So let's talk a little bit about this. There's 3 different types of annuities that we want to address today. There's the fixed annuity, which is very simple to understand. There's the fixed indexed annuity, which is not so easy to understand and which is confusing. And the problem with the fixed indexed annuity is simply that that's the most popular type of annuity that's being recommended and sold today. Then there's the variable annuity. The variable annuity we won't spend much time on because I have a belief that it's going to be extinct within a couple of years. The popularity is declining on those products. Insurance companies aren't pushing those products as much. They're not being recommended as much. So let's start off with the fixed annuity. Very easy to understand. Think of a fixed annuity as similar to a CD with a couple of differences. The first major difference between a fixed annuity and a CD is simply that the fixed annuity has got a pretty hefty surrender charge, period. So if you take that money out within the first, let's say 10 years, 7 years, whatever the number of years of the contract, you take a pretty big penalty. That's the first difference. Second difference is that fixed annuities, the growth of a fixed annuity is not taxable. It's tax deferred until you take it out. Whereas with a CD, you're paying taxes along the way unless you're in a retirement account. So other than those 2 big differences, they're really pretty much the same. So what you want to find out is what is the fixed guaranteed rate, what is the surrender charge period. You really want to be comfortable with that. And what is the liquidity provisions? because these annuities also have ways that you can take money out without being charged a surrender charge. Typically, it's one of two ways. It's either 10% of the annuity contract for that year, or it is interest only. Now, here's the next question that I really believe you have to ask yourself. Are you investing for the right reasons? And why I pose that question is I've watched as investors have gone through a period of investing, taking some risk, got burned, or had a bad experience. And so immediately they went from being able to handle some risk to a situation where they don't have the mindset for risk anymore. And that's problematic, because what they end up doing is they go from here, where they're taking risk, way over here where they won't take any risk at all. Now, there's nothing wrong with a risk profile like that, except that I think that if you at one point in your life had a mindset that you could take some risk, you got to figure out what went wrong and what you would do differently and take another risk again instead of going all the way far to the right. Now, if you're just wired that way, if you're what I call the prudent money DNA for risk is risk averse, then you're risk averse. The challenge, though, that you run into is that you've got to take some risk, because it's tough to grow your money at 3% per year and get to your financial goals. So it's important to be able to take a little bit of risk, but once again, if your risk profile is such that you don't want to take any risk at all, then that is what it is. Have you shopped rates? The reality is that if you looked at a rate sheet of the going rates of fixed annuities, you would see a big difference. You would see companies that are paying 3%, you would see companies that are paying 2%. So you want to make sure that you're going with the best rate. So that's the fixed annuity. Pretty basic, pretty easy to understand. Now we get into the fixed indexed annuities. This is a little bit tougher to understand. Once again, the popularity of fixed index annuities is huge. It's the biggest type of annuity that's selling today. Think of a fixed index annuity this way. If you have your fixed annuity that's paying 3%, think of a fixed indexed annuity as a way to increase the probabilities that you make more. It puts you in a position that you can make more. Now, to be fair, you can make less. It just depends on how the fixed index annuity works. You got to think of it in 12-month periods. Day one, you put your money in, and then the last day of the 12th month, they value the contract for that 12 months. You don't get individual statements, you don't get individual values. You just get, for the 12-month period, is the value of the contract. Now, it's driven by a formula. So you have day one, the money goes in, and then the formula dictates from that 12-month period what you actually make in that fixed indexed annuity. So that's important to know. Now let's talk a little bit about the three contract values. I told you this would be a little confusing. There's the contract value, which is the actual value of the contract. There's the contract value minus surrender charges, which if you were to take the money out, they would deduct the surrender charges. That's what you'd get. And then there's the income rider value. I include that in there, not that every contract has an income rider. And an income rider simply means that at some point you can turn your contract into an income stream and take money out. So the three different values sometimes get confused, because the income rider value, that part of the contract, is always bigger in most cases than the contract value. And so what an investor will do, they'll look at their statement, they'll see that bigger value, and they'll think, well, if I took all my money out today, this is what I would get. That's not what you would get. You would get the contract value minus surrender charges, or if you were at the end of the contract, you would just get the contract value. Now let's talk a little bit about the formula. The formula is linked to an index, and there's a lot of different formulas, there's a lot of different indexes, so let's definitely keep this very basic and very easy to understand. And we'll just say that the formula is linked to the S&P 500 index. Now, there's two ways that you value this formula. Let's start with day one and go through to the last day of the 12th month. Let's say that your formula is driven by a cap, and let's say that you can earn up to 4% of the value of the S&P index during that 12-month period. So let's say during that 12-month period, you put your money in day one, it grows to the end of the 12th month, and the S&P 500 during that same time period grows 5%. Well, you're capped at 4, so you would have a 4% return. So let's say you started with 100,000. At the end of the 12-month period, you would have 104,000. And then you'd start your new 12-month period, your new valuation period, your new formula period. So let's say the S&P 500 earns 10%. Well, you'd still only earn 4%. Let's say that the S&P 500 earned 3%. You would earn up to 3%. You just can't earn more than 4%. What if the index loses? Well, that's the guarantee part of the annuity, is that your $100,000 would still remain $100,000. You wouldn't lose. You're guaranteed not to lose. Something about guarantees that you need to know. Every time an insurance company gives you a guarantees, they're taking something away from you. Because if they're going to take the risk of guaranteeing something, they're going to reduce their risk, which reduces your reward. So you got to know that every time you take a guarantee, that's what happens. So what is the index? You want to know what that is. Oh, let me go back to participation driven. If it's participation driven, then you earn a percent of the index. So let's say that you earn, no cap, up to 30% of the S&P 500 during that 12-month period. So if the S&P 500 went up 10%, you'd earn 3%. If it went up 20%, you'd earn 6%. Once again, if the S&P 500 lost money, you would just not earn anything, and your value would stay at the same as it was day one. How does the income rider work? These can be somewhat complicated to understand, so you want to know how the income rider works, at what point that you can start taking income, what that income will be. Now, here's the thing about the income rider that it appeals to a lot of people. It's guaranteed to pay out for the rest of your life. So if you live to be 100, or let's say you live to be 99, it's going to continue paying out every single year. Even if you deplete the value of the contract, it still pays out. So this is a pretty popular addition. And the other thing too that you want to know, is this going to cost me anything? Because some contracts, there's a cost for the income rider. Some contracts, they include it inside the contract. What is the surrender charge period? You want to know that. What are the liquidity provisions? How does the death benefit work? The death benefit can be limited sometimes. It can be restricted sometimes. The death benefit could be that it's an enhanced death benefit. So you want to know exactly how that works. Then what is the minimum guaranteed return? Most of these contracts have guaranteed returns on them. So let's say that the guaranteed return is 1%. But let's say you had a horrible time with this annuity. For 10 years, you averaged 0.5%. They'd bring you up to 1% because that was the guarantee that you could make on the product. A variable annuity. Like I said, I won't spend a whole lot of time on this because the variable annuity is, I think, going to be extinct here within a couple of years. You know, and the reason being is that it's a very expensive investment. The expenses are really high in a variable annuity, and I think that outweighs the benefits of it. You want to know what the sub-accounts are. Sub-accounts are simply the way the money grows. Like, so you have stock funds, bond funds, that type of thing, international funds, and those sub-accounts work a lot like mutual funds, but they're valued different, and they're referred to as sub-accounts. You know, how does the income rider work? How does the death benefit work? You want to know all that as well if you're getting into a variable annuity. Now, pitfalls of annuities. Advisor oversells the potential growth. Advisor doesn't explain the hypothetical realistically. Advisor uses non-guaranteed returns to show income. Advisor oversells the guaranteed income rider. Advisor doesn't explain the bonus. Now you can kind of see why this is problematic. And you go back to the example of annuities being sold rather than recommended. There's a lot of pitfalls that you have to be aware of. And you know, I can sum all this up with a illustration. Most of the time, the advisor will give you what's called a hypothetical illustration. And that is designed to show you what potentially the fixed indexed annuity formulas can do. It's very flawed, I believe, and I'll tell you why here in a minute. You know, the word hypothetical, excuse me, comes from the word hypothesis, which is just an idea or a guess, and that's simply what it is. It's a guess as to what could happen. But yet, the advisor will typically present this hypothetical as more than just a hypothetical. This is what this really can do. When once again, it's not the case. So what you'll get on a hypothetical illustration in most cases is a best case scenario, an average case scenario, and a worst case scenario. So what they do, let's say they go back over the last 20 years and they find the 12-month period that this formula that you're looking at did the best. And it's going to look good. It's going to be 6 to 7% rate of return on average, and you're really going to like it. Then the average, let's say, is 3.5 to 4%. And then you get down to the worst case and it's like 1.5%. Now, from a human nature standpoint, I think what we do, we have a tendency to gravitate to the best case scenario, and we just really hope that works out. Because after all, a guaranteed contract making 6 to 7% a year, pretty good. But here's the problem, is that all three of these scenarios assume that the formula doesn't change. And the advisor typically doesn't mention this, because if an advisor is selling a product, once again, there's a big difference between selling a product and recommending a product. But if the advisor is selling a product, then he or she is probably not going to mention that every year those formulas can change. And it's designed that way to protect the insurance company. This is no news flash. The insurance company is going to look out for themselves before they're going to look out for you. That's just the reality of it. They're given those guarantees, they're going to protect themselves. So they have the ability to change that formula each year. Now, they're probably not going to change it each year, but they're going to change it enough to make that hypothetical illustration not really valid. So you really have no way of knowing exactly what's going to happen. And then you'll see on the illustration, you'll see guaranteed versus non-guaranteed values. An advisor who's selling is going to gravitate towards the non-guaranteed. Once again, it is a guess as to, and they're a little bit overly aggressive on that guess as to what they could make. You want to be happy with the guaranteed values because, after all, they are guaranteed. And I specifically talk about that in terms of the income rider contract. The income rider, you want to, if you look in year 5 and you think, well, year 5, I'm going to start taking income out. Look at the guaranteed number that is associated with the contract. If you're happy with that, then that's good. But if you're not, then maybe you want to look at a different contract. But always focus on the guaranteed, because the non-guaranteed is really oversold. Now, here's another secret that you really need to know about fixed index annuities. Each annuity does one thing really good. It's not to say that they don't exist, but for the most part, annuities aren't designed, fixed index annuities are not designed to do two things really good. So they're either designed to be a growth engine, they're either designed for liquidity or income or a death benefit. And actually, I left one out. I was thinking about this earlier today. I left off one other on that list, a long-term care benefit. Sometimes these income streams can turn into a long-term care benefit if you need them to. So something that is geared towards growth is not going to have a good income benefit. Something that's geared towards income is not going to have a good growth benefit. And I'll give you a good example. Let's say that you're comparing two different fixed index annuities. One is geared towards growth, one is geared towards income. The one geared towards growth, you can earn up to 4% of the S&P 500 in any 12-month period. The one that's geared towards income, you can earn up to 2.25% of the S&P 500. I think, to be fair, an advisor who's is recommending doing the right thing, going through the right process, should tell the client, listen, don't focus on the growth. The growth is not going to make you happy. Focus on what that income contract value is. Focus on what the income is, because that's why we're investing into this. If it has an enhanced death benefit, which some annuities do, so if you have your objective is, I've got this money, I want to grow it, and I want to leave it for my family. Well, then an annuity that has an enhanced death benefit, a greater death benefit than the contract value, is going to appeal to you. But once again, the overall growth of the contract probably not going to impress you, because that's not what it's designed for. So it's extremely important that you understand that aspect of it. Now, other things you need to know. Careful with the insurance company you choose. Obviously, you want to choose an insurance company with good ratings. Careful with the advisor incentive programs. You have to know that insurance agencies, and in combination with insurance companies, will provide incentive programs that will encourage an advisor to sell their annuity. Now, as you've learned, not every annuity is right for everyone. You need to pick the right annuity that does meets the objective and your needs. And it may not be the one that's linked to the incentive program. But if the advisor is selling the one that's linked to the incentive program, then you're going to end up 3 or 4 years down the road unhappy because you didn't get into the right program. So for instance, let's say that if you sell $2 million worth of annuities with this particular annuity with this particular company, then you win a trip to Hawaii. You can see the conflict of interest. It's not good. And I've come across agencies where they do this, and they really push the annuity. They push the benefits of it. Once again, it's the sales process, not the recommendation process. The next one is make sure your advisor isn't going to check out. Now, here's what I mean by that. Just because you start off investing into an annuity, a fixed index annuity, doesn't mean that every 12 months you have to make a decision. You have to know what has changed in the contract. And you need advice on which formula, because every contract has several formulas that's attached to it, and you want to know what's the best, what the advisor thinks is the best. So the advisor needs to stay engaged in the process, and unfortunately most don't. Annuities are sold more than recommended. We talked about that. Needs to be a good reason to absorb surrender charges. So if an advisor comes up to you and you have an annuity, and they say to you that, listen, I know that you would take a 5% surrender charge hit, but this annuity is so much better. Now, truthfully, investment companies have a real problem with this, but they still allow it to happen if the advisor can justify it. To me, it's a tough justification, and it's a personal decision by the client to really want to take a hit like that. But this is the way they do it. They'll say, listen, you're going to take a 5% surrender charge, but we're going to give you a 5% bonus over here. And careful with the bonuses, because the bonuses, you hear that, well, I'm going to get a 5% bonus. Well, yeah, but listen to it from the standpoint of, what are the restrictions on the bonus? Are there restrictions? Does that 5% bonus go to the contract value or the income rider value? I was talking to somebody who was about to invest into an annuity recommended by an advisor, and he said, I really like the strength of this bonus. And number one, his main objective was a death benefit. The advisor was selling an annuity based on the income rider, which didn't even apply, but the bonus caught his eye. I talked about the sizzle. If right here, remember right here, where the annuity contract is being sold, and the advisor mentions something that catches the eye of the client, then that's what they focus in on. So he was focused in on that bonus. But I explained to him, because I knew the contract, that bonus is associated with the income rider, not the contract value. And he had very, very different thoughts. Make sure you thoroughly understand, and also know the advisor may not fully understand the product. What ends up happening is the insurance company rolls these products out. They do what's called a road show. They come to your town, someone will hold a meeting, they'll teach you the product, and so the advisors will take notes and they'll basically regurgitate what they were told. That's a lot of the way the sales process works. That doesn't mean they understand it. That doesn't mean that they're making a good recommendation. So you want to be real careful with who you work with. I said at the beginning of the teaching course that $228 billion flowed into annuities in 2015 and $163 billion in the first 3 quarters of 2016. That's a lot of money flowing into one type of investment. What troubles me about that is that so many of these investors are putting their life savings into a product they don't understand, or putting money into a product that is not been explained one way and they understood it to be another way. I used to have a big problem with annuities, and I used to say that, and this is really back when they had what's called an equity index annuity, which was an awful form of annuity, and there were lawsuits, complaints that came about it, and they finally got rid of that. And this fixed index annuity is a better product if it meets your profile. So the question comes down to, are annuities good or bad? Well, they're not good or bad. It comes down to, is it a fit for you? And it's important to make sure that you are investing in the right option.